kind of collectively experiencing. And I was going to begin, talking about that and work with that. And I wasn't going to make it the theme today in itself. I was going to more continue with with what I've been talking about, which is kind of very much connected to that, but more about resources that can help us deal with the challenges of, all that we're going through in these times. So that I think will be more of the focus. It's part of life to deal with, stresses and fears and, difficult mind states and difficult situations in the world. And our practice is a great support for us in providing really resources to help us deal with all that we're experiencing. And that all that we're experiencing now, particularly in a collective way, has really expanded, in really dramatic ways. Just to name very, very things that are obvious to us, but just the enormity of 300 and at the last count, a day ago at least, 316,000 people have died from COVID-19, from the virus. And we haven't really had any collective ways of sharing the grief, and that's something that I very much hope, as the new administration comes in and there's real attention paid, both to dealing actively with what do we need to do to be sure that we're safe and that people get the vaccines that are becoming available, that we also will address, and I'm pretty confident we will, the weight on the heart of all that we've experienced in these last years, experienced in different ways, but experienced collectively. I've often shared that, some people are dealing with very direct costs of the pandemic, of losing loved ones. I was just in a live session on Insight Timer just before this today, and somebody shared in the chat, the comments, that her mother had died in the last 2 days, I think 2 days ago. And there was a lovely collective holding of her in that space, just as, if somebody here is experiencing loss or suffering, this is very much a place where they can feel held. And but in a larger sense, we're going through this. The word unprecedented has become a bit of a cliche, but it is really unprecedented. I was thinking that the last time, and for most of us were not alive at this time, but the last time that I think that we've, perhaps as a country and certainly as a world, that we've been through anything like what we're experiencing now on a collective level. I would say, on a health level, obviously it's 100 years ago, but on a kind of another level, not about health, but about conflict, is World War II. And I was thinking of how the time we're in right now, where we're still at the kind of the worst phase of the pandemic, what's going on here with over 3,000 people dying a day, or, between right now 2,500, there was a couple of days it was 3,200. 3,600 one day, people dying in the United States in one day. The number of people that we've lost in the United States is, I think, has reached the levels of the losses in World War II. And similarly in other countries, you know, it's over 60,000 people have died in the UK, and in Europe, in continental Europe, it's 40, 50,000 in different countries. And there's also all the other kinds of losses that we've talked about and experienced people experience in different ways. You know, loss of work. People have been out of work for 9, 10 months now. You know, we've all seen on the TV the miles and miles of cars as people line up for food support. You know, and I've seen on TV, on the news, people who are getting practically all of their meals from you know, from food distribution. You know, the folks who are providing that that support in many different towns and communities around the country. So this loss that we're experiencing individually and collectively, I was saying that a couple of different things I'm kind of saying at the same time here, that we haven't really had ways of sharing collectively. Many people who've suffered losses haven't had ways of really fully grieving individually and as families. We certainly haven't had many opportunities, and no real opportunity as a country to reflect on the magnitude of the loss that we're going through. So we're really right in the middle of it. I hope that in the coming months we will have the opportunity to mourn the losses. You know, I've talked, you know, at different times over these recent months, over this last year, about kind of the notion of unmourned grief. You know, there's so much grief, I think, that we're holding individually and collectively that we haven't had the means or the opportunity to mourn, to allow ourselves to kind of process particularly in a collective way. So in the way where we're holding each other as going through this, recognizing that even though each of us has our own experience of grief and loss, that we can hold it together because all of us have experienced grief and loss. I mean, I don't think there's anyone here who hasn't suffered some loss in their life. You know, loss of a loved one, a family member, you know, loss of something personal, of a relationship. All of those losses, we know what the experience is, and when we hold it collectively in Sangha, in community, there's something that's extraordinarily healing in that process, in that collective grieving, and so kind of recognizing the need to do that, and that we're doing it in some way, you know, even being together, practicing together, holding space together. We're doing some level of that, and I hope we'll continue to do that in our own way as a community. And I hope over, you know, the activities that we do at the end of the year, we're going to be doing some things, some collective kind of getting together around the new year, that we'll be able to share some of that together. Maybe when we do the meditation on New Year's Eve, and Bob will be leading a kind of helping lead a poetry session that we might share some reflections there about kind of holding space for that. Those things are very much in the works, but just kind of finding our own ways to do that, finding ways to do it as a society and as a world. And kind of coming back to just the kind of the magnitude of what we're experiencing, that I kind of brought up the comparison of, the kind of the link, the connection in some way with World War II. Most of us weren't, certainly if we were around, we probably weren't old enough to remember much specifically about it. Kind of more our parents or our grandparents' generation. My dad was in the Royal Air Force in the UK in the war, and kind of my knowledge, was largely through him and through my mother. But what was coming up for me about this time we're in right now, not the pandemic so much generally, but even more specifically this period of like this month we're in right now, where we have the pandemic, where we're at the worst stage we've been in throughout this last 9-10 months, and it may get worse before it gets better. So it's like we see the light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccines coming online, 2 vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines being approved and being rolled out there. But by the time everybody, gets vaccinated, close to everybody, it'll be at least 6 months. It may be closer to the fall before we get there. So there's a lot of pain and suffering before we get to the other side. But in that way, it feels a little bit like, 1944 after D-Day, the things, things are moving forward, and there's a sense of momentum and an end in sight, but we're not there yet. So it's a strange period. I kind of talked about it last week or the week before as a bardo, that in-between stage in Tibetan Buddhism after death and before whatever, that follows on from that, the next life, etc. We are very much in a kind of a bardo or a limbo if you're in the Catholic tradition. It can be another image. And the other part is something we've talked about, and some people may think I've talked too much about over these months, is just the political time we're in. Again, we've had an election that's been, one of the most secure and fairest in history, according to the government, the US government, according to the Cyber Security Agency, etc. It was decisive. It was by 7 million plus votes. And yet we're still in this period where it's being contested in what I can only term a delusional and conspiratorial way. And I say that with compassion for those who are caught up in those delusions, but still say firmly those are delusions. And so we're in the midst of that too until we get to January 20th. And, hopefully, the keys are turned over to the new the new occupants of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and we begin, I hope, a process. I deeply hope and have some confidence in a process of healing, of moving towards compassion, of moving towards obviously a resolution and a ending of the pandemic, and all taking wise steps to do everything we need to do to get out the other side of the health crisis, of the pandemic, but also to heal the suffering of the last 4 years of the cruelty and the dishonesty. I mean, that's been one of the things that been hardest on my heart over these years, is the sheer attempt to, create alternative realities in order to divide people. I mean, if people don't know what's true, that's one thing. But when falsehoods are used to create alternative realities in order to divide people, that is it adds an additional level of pain and suffering. So I don't want to go into that in more depth than that, because people have shared, like, well, I come for something else, and to honor that people don't come, may come in many ways to get away from a lot of the things that we're watching on the news, and it can be kind of a little heavy to be confronted with that. So it's a challenge, and as I've spoken about, to balance that, to acknowledge the reality, to acknowledge the truth as best I can speak truth, but also to honor where the different reasons people come. And so I wanted to just reflect on that, particularly with Cassie's question, and to invite us to share in the chat, any reflections you have around what you're going through and what you're working with, and any insights you have, because we're kind of we're sharing the kind of the wisdom and the insight that we have and the experiences that we're going through. And I want to, having said that, just wish everybody happy holidays, happy, Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa, solstice. If there's something maybe as well very appropriate, I don't know what the exact word is, appropriate, year of the shortest, as we come to the shortest day of the year, which in our ancestors, this was the time when kind of the ending of one kind of cycle and the kind of moving in as the days grow longer. And I remember visiting one of the historic sites in Ireland, New Grange. I don't know, some of you may have been there. Were built 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, a wonderful kind of monument on a hillside north of Dublin. And it's one of these tombs where you can walk into the tomb, and at the center is the grave, but above the entrance to the grave, and maybe it's 60 feet, I don't know how many feet exactly it is, but on the solstice, the light shines through the hole above the doorway into the grave, shines all the way into the center of the tomb, 60 feet in, just kind of, and that was, for them, the folks of that time, was a way that they knew and connected with that time of the year. And it shines through only on the solstice, on the winter solstice, that it goes through. And just the kind of, I remember that as kind of just the knowledge that we have as humans, even before the historic period, the written history period, or maybe very early at the beginning of this written history period. we're in that period now where it's the darkest time of the year, and it's like there's a sense that I have of hope, hope around the pandemic, hope around the whole. It's almost too small a word to say politics, because it affects everything, but about the how we live together, our public life, our way of living together has been so harmed and affected by these last 4 years, and that we have on the horizon, I think, the hope for better days ahead. And I don't think I'm saying that in Pollyanna-ish ways. I think there's a lot of evidence-based for that, on both grounds, on the health grounds and on the kind of political, social grounds as well. So I just share that as a kind of an extemporaneous reflection on this time we're in, and how we can hold it. And coming back to what I have been kind of focusing on these last few weeks has been on the resources, which also speaks to this. It's like, what is it that supports us, particularly in our individual practice, but it's also in our collective practice. What is it that supports us? What is it that allows us and helps us hold the suffering and the pain that we're experiencing in these times? How do these practices help us? And in these last few weeks, I spoke about the power of awareness itself, to just come out of, often it's out of our stories in our heads, into our direct experience, just to kind of, if we're angry or we're caught up in anxiety or grief, that rather than being kind of lost in the anger or in the fear or the anxiety, we just check in, we just come back, noticing, what am I noticing right now? I come back to the breath, come back to the body. And in doing that, there's a power. We're stepping out of virtual reality into our direct experience. And out of that, then can come an opening to our experience, and all of the insights that can come with that, the clarity, the wisdom that can open up. I spoke to a couple of weeks ago about the practice of self-compassion, particularly when we're caught up in what's painful, what's really causes us suffering, to come back and recognize, bring kindness to ourselves, to consciously cultivate compassion towards ourselves. It could be as simple as just putting our hand on our heart and on our belly, taking a breath and just wishing ourselves well. May I be safe. May I be happy. May I be kind to myself. May I accept myself as I am. And just coming back, that as a practice. I spoke to, and the following week, I think, I can't remember the order, but I think the reverse order of the power of gratitude, of coming, recognizing what we already have as a resource for us. When we're caught up in what's wrong, or we're angry about things, or we're not getting what we need, we're feeling something's missing, we come back and recognize what we have, what's here right now, what we have that we easily forget about, easily take for granted. And last week, as I recall, I spoke about the power of saying yes to our experience, and kind of the formal practice of saying yes. Whatever's here, can I say yes to this? It's very much the core of our practice, of a radical acceptance, welcoming the guests, all the other metaphors that we have. And what I wanted to talk about today as a resource is something that's very, very close to my heart, and it is a helpful resource for me when I'm feeling stressed or, caught up in one form of suffering or another. And that is to come back to poetry. It may be a poem, it may be some lines from a poem, it may be an image from a poem. And what has been powerful to me in my practice over the years has been to really bring poetry consciously into the practice, into my practice, and also into my teaching. And as probably almost all of you know, I typically include poetry in the meditations and in the, in the talks and reflections that I share. And what I want to do today, and I'm conscious of time, that I don't want to go on and do a talk and then another meditation, and then we only have 5 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is to kind of do a little bit of a combination of a talk and meditation. Maybe it's about 20 minutes, and then we can move into, Emily will lead us in some movement, we'll do some sharing, in probably small group sharing, and then come back to the larger group, and then we'll have a meditation to finish. But I think a good way to do it would be to take around 20 minutes to talk about this kind of connection of poetry and meditation. And I know, for a number of you, this is very, very close to your hearts as well. And bow to Bob for your gathering people with this theme of kind of poetry and stories. And I think what I'd invite you to do is, as though you're beginning the meditation, and we will really begin the meditation, but I'll be a little bit more discursive at the beginning and then move more into the formal meditation. And just kind of reflect for myself that this connection of mindfulness and poetry has been, as I've said, a very meaningful one. I think one of the ways in which what we're doing in mindfulness practice is, one of the things we're doing is we're kind of stepping out of autopilot, stepping out of our, kind of everyday mind where we're kind of lost in thought a lot of the time. What we could call virtual reality. We're not really present for our, maybe not be very connected to our bodies, not really connected to our emotions or our feelings, but we're very much in our heads. We're very much caught up in thoughts. And that for me, poetry has been a way, as I've said, to kind of step out of that reality, or that partial reality of being in kind of virtual reality, and more to drop into direct experience. So poetry, I think, can help us in that way of connecting deeply with ourselves through words and images. It can help us to drop into present moment awareness, into reflection, into contemplation. And I want to just reflect a few ways that I've found poetry can help do this in my experience, for me, and kind of, I think, can broadly connect us with meditation and with mindfulness. How it can be, how poetry and meditation can weave together. How we can kind of marinate, as it were, in a poem, or with a poem, or the poem can marinate. If you think of that image of marinating, of a vegetable or a meat in the liquid, and just that the liquid seeping into the food. And I think of that with poetry, that it kind of almost kind of come into us, in a way where teacher Trudy Goodman shared in one of her newsletters, I think of, maybe she got it from someone else, another teacher, but maybe from a Zen teacher, but the notion, the idea of kind of walking through a thin mist, and you hardly notice that you're going through the mist. But then when you get to your destination, you find that the mist has kind of drained into your clothing, you know, and it's kind of seeped into everything. And I think that kind of poetry in that way can kind of seep into us. And I just want to reflect on a few ways, that powerful ways I think that it can support us in our meditation practice. And I've said, you know, mentioned that, you know, helping us kind of gather our attention, helping us drop out of conceptual and discursive thinking and into the present moment. And I think of one of the best known, I think it's a haiku, it's a kind of a poem anyway, from the Zen teacher Basho. And it's the old pond. The old pond, frog jumps in, plop. That's the poem. And it's like, and there are about, you know, there are many translations of that poem, because it's a very beloved poem in the Japanese language, obviously, but I've translated into English. But that's my favorite translation, and it's by Alan Watts, you know, great, you know, renowned Western Zen teacher. What the first Buddhisty book I read was Alan Watts' The Power of the Way of Zen. Probably others here have read that book, maybe from the 60s or the 70s. The Way of Zen, Alan Watts. But what I like about that is the plop. You know, the plop kind of drops us down drops me down into the present moment. More than some of the other translations. Also, poetry provides images and metaphors that can help us see life more clearly. You know, I think of, you know, an obvious one being the metaphor of the guest house. You know, this being human is a guest house. You know, every day a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. I think I'll just invite us to share the poems, even though and because they're familiar as well. The momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. So that notion of the guest house, you know, is one that's familiar probably to almost everyone here. The guests coming to visit, you know, and noticing right now what guest or guests may be visiting you, and just meeting them with kindness, as Rumi invites us to do. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So welcoming the guests. In the same way, you know, the image that almost everyone here will be familiar with, because I come back to it so often, is Martha Postlethwaite's image of a clearing. You know, it seems so appropriately a meditation image, or at least a meditative image of creating a space. And since it's only 70 some words, we can come back to that as well. Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is yours alone to sing falls into your open, cupped hands, and you recognize and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. So that image, the image of the clearing, the image of the dense forest, for me, it's a powerful one of kind of speaking to the busyness, the to-dos, the stresses of life. And just being able, like in the forest, in the woods, that space, that clearing opens. Imagine the druids, there in the plains around New Grange, in the woods. People coming into a clearing, a space, gathering together. People have been doing in cultures for thousands and thousands of years. And this image, the image of the clearing. And the poetry too can give us food for reflection and contemplation. The lines of, I'm going back for the manyth time to T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, reading some of the background to his writing of the quartets back in the 30s and the early 40s. Some of the most I think these poems, this poem, the quartets, 4 of them, are some of the most meditative poetry, certainly of the last century or so. And I come back to some of the lines over and over. I share these before, but I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the hope and the love are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing. That kind of image, that reflection of waiting. For me, it's very much what we do in meditation. It's not that we're waiting for some specific thing, but we're in this kind of receptive attitude, attitude of receptivity. And we're waiting, you could say we're waiting in a non-clinging way for insight, for clarity, for wisdom, for a deeper awareness to arise out of the stillness, out of the solitude, out of the silence, coming out of that image may be helpful for you too, for just sitting with, opening to. Poetry can, one of the most kind of powerful ways it can support us is to really bring us back to our hearts, touching into what is meaningful, what is soulful, what connects us with what we care about most deeply, with ourselves, what we love, our world. Think of these lines from Rumi again. He says, today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door of your study and begin reading. take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground, including reading, if that's your way. So poetry is a way to touch into our hearts. There's some lines close to the ones that I shared from T.S. Eliot from East Coca, the second of the quartets, which also has the kind of the reflective, contemplative quality. He says, in order to arrive there, to arrive where you are, to get from where you are not, you must go by a way wherein there is no ecstasy. In order to arrive at what you do not know, you must go by a way which is the way of ignorance. In order to possess what you do not possess, you must go by the way of dispossession. In order to arrive at what you are not, you must go through the way in which you are not. And what you do not know is the only thing you know, and what you own is what you do not own. And where you are is where you are not. So, like those lines, the poem can point us really to what's beyond words, which point to what words can only perhaps get to the edge of. It's the reason that in Zen, they speak of Zen as being beyond words. It's a pointing at the truth. So you're looking at what is being pointed at, not at the pointer. The finger pointing at the moon. You're not supposed to study the finger, but rather what the finger is pointing at, the moon. So the words point at something that is beyond words. They evoke what's beyond words. Those lines for me evoke what's beyond words. To get to where you are not, you must go through the way in which you are not. And what you are is what you are not. What does that mean? It's not, in a way, it's a kind of Zen koan where there's not an easy logical answer, a rational answer. It has to come from the mystery. It really has to come from letting go. Poetry can also point us to what's most important. I think of Mary Oliver's The Summer Day, where she asks these big questions, who made the world, the black bear, the grasshopper. And then she speaks of this grasshopper and goes into the grasshopper with its enormous eyes, moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who's gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. And then Mary Oliver comes back to kind of the more reflective mode, after being in the really fine attention mode that is such a mark of Mary Oliver's poems and poetry and her life, just her ability to pay attention. She says, I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day, Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So coming out of the reflection into the inquiry, into the question, almost, not quite a defensiveness, but a sense of, a need to almost explain the hours spent wandering, idle and blessed, strolling through the fields, and turning the question round to the reader, to the listener. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And that question, those last two lines, bring me back to just that big question. Whether we're, we could think we might have 10 more years or 20 more years of life, or whether we have 30 or might have 30 or 40 or 50, whatever age we're in. And we never know when our time is going to come anyway. But wherever we are, that question, I think, can bring us back to, how do I want to spend these days, the remainder of my life? How do I want to spend this day? How do I want to spend this moment right now? Come back to that question, what do I care about most deeply? How do I want to live this life? What do I want to cultivate? What do I want to let go of? So all of these ways that poetry can help us to drop into just this being here. So we'll take a few more minutes just in a meditative, reflective, contemplative, whatever's most helpful for you right now. Maybe you might bring to mind an image that has come up in these 20 minutes or 25 minutes or so that I've been speaking. Or maybe just to drop into your present experience, aware of your body. How is your body holding and meeting, all that's present for you right now, all of the difficulties and the suffering, and all of the joy, maybe any peace you might be finding right here and now. Just to hold it all with kindness, with care. How is it to meet what's present for you right now with kindness and with acceptance? How is it to say yes to what is here? Saying yes as a doorway into a deeper knowing, a deeper connection with yourself, with your experience, with your life, with the world. Just feeling us all here together, held in a field of shared intentions, shared intention to wake up, to see things more clearly, to live more kindly, more wisely. All this kind of mandala of shared intentions and shared practice, each of us individually opening to our own expression of what's here in the body and heart and mind, and how it interacts with and meets the wider world, meets each other, meets the world. Feeling us together, this collective field of loving kindness, of care. Finishing with this from Dana Ford's Walk Slowly. It only takes a reminder to breathe, a moment to be still, and just like that, something in me settles, softens, makes space for imperfection. The harsh voice of judgment drops to a whisper, and I remember again that life isn't a relay race, that we will all cross the finish line, that waking up to life is what we were born for. As many times as I forget, catch myself charging forward without even knowing where I'm going, that many times I can make the choice to stop, to breathe, to be, and walk slowly into the mystery. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Emily, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Emily. We'll now move into some mindful movement with Emily.
Take a moment to raise your arms and reach up, lifting up, and gather the energy of the sky. This day, one of the shortest of the year, reaching up, cultivating that energy, and bring it to your heart. And gather the energy of this room, all of us together, the kindness, the compassion, and bring that to your heart. And then gather the energy of the earth, that which gives so much abundance, and bring that energy to your heart. And now bring your arms alongside, come up into Cactus Pose. We'll move 3 times to the right. Inhaling deeply, exhale to the right, back to center, to the right, back to center, and to the right, back to center. Another deep inhale. And exhale, left and center and left and center and left and center. Holding your arms up, drop your hands and lift, drop and lift and drop and lift up. Float your arms down and open up into the space around you, swaying, swinging from side to side. And then bring your arms down and slowly reach up, grasp one wrist, inhaling deeply, and exhale towards that opposite side. Tilting, taking a breath here into your rib cage. Exhale, maybe a little deeper. And then back to center. Switch hands. Inhaling deeply. Exhale, tilt to the opposite side. Hold here for just a moment. And reach up and float your arms down. Gather your hands behind your back. Inhale, lengthen your arms away from your body. Exhale, release. Inhale, lengthen, opening up the chest. And exhale, release. Last time. Inhaling up. And exhale, release. Float your arms up. Roll your shoulders. Roll them the other way. And now, last movement. Place your hands above your knees and lower. Allow gravity to pull your body down, your head, your shoulders. Your arms float down to the earth. And then press on your feet and rise up, placing your hands at heart center and release to the sky. Release to us and to the earth. Thank you.
So what I'd invite you to do, anyone who'd like to, is share anything about, what came up for you in the talk, the reflection, the meditation, or in a small group. Anything that's meaningful, please use the chat box for that. And I think it would be nice to hear from a couple of folks. We don't have a lot of time, but at least have a few other folks talk, so it's not just me. Are you reaching to talk, Julie, or just to no? Okay. Let's see. I'm not seeing any virtual hands, and I'm seeing if, oh, I saw a hand there somewhere. No?
Leslie has a thumbs up. Is that her hand raise?
Is that Leslie?
Yes, it is.
If it's a hand raise, go ahead.
Yeah, it was. And I guess my question or my comment has to do with feelings about the poetry versus the poet. I love the poetry of T.S. Eliot. I love the four quartets. But what was also going through my mind as I was listening is, he was also a well-known anti-Semite. So this, you know, this brings up a question not just relevant to artists, to poets whom we admire and enjoy and who help us, but it's a common thing. And I was wondering if you'd care to offer a take or some reflection on that.
Yeah, I could definitely do that. Do we have a couple of hours? It's a big thing that you're raising, and it's a little challenging to say something that doesn't lean too much one way or another in a short period of time. But I'll try and do that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real issue. It's a real dilemma. You get the kind of the polarities of the debate. I think we're all familiar with that. Kind of an extreme version on one side would be, people should be free to say whatever, and if people came from an earlier period, then, well, you've got to understand all that. And then on the other side, maybe a very strict view that any views that are, misogynist, all of the ways people can cause harm, that everything, there's an automatic kind of, we shouldn't even be reading them or listening to them or watching. It's obviously, I mean, I would say there's obviously there's a spectrum there. There are certain, people whose behavior is so egregious and certain actions are so, horrendous that obviously we wouldn't celebrate them, and we wouldn't share them in a way that, where we draw those lines, I think within any community there may be, that we may have differences. And I find it most helpful not to get into, certainly not to get into a polemic about it, but to be open to, views like, what you shared about in relation to T.S. Eliot. There may be some people who would say about T.S. Eliot, and it's not that I'm unaware of it. I don't know a lot. I haven't studied in detail, what's been said about him in relation to anti-Semitism, but I've certainly have heard that. Is that grounds for, how bad was it? How egregious was it? I mean, certainly Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice, does that mean we don't read Shakespeare, or Shakespeare gets cut out of the curriculum? I mean, there's a lot of, a lot of complexity about it. And I think all I would say is I want for myself to be open to hearing if there are good reasons to, not share, material. If I'm in a role of teacher, for example, to be really open to that, and to learn and to change, if that's if that's needed and that's appropriate. But I think I would just kind of invite us all to engage with it as both an essential issue to address, and also to address with nuance and complexity. And I say nuance and complexity, acknowledging complexity, not as in any way justifying, things that shouldn't be justified, but just acknowledging that it is a complex area, and there will be the easy cases on each side, and there will be the difficult cases, whether in terms of the individual or whether in terms of the action, etc. That's kind of the best I can do in a short answer, given that we're not going to have, a long time to debate it and discuss it today. I'd invite again, if people have thoughts on that today, to share your thoughts in the chat. I always share the chat, save the chat. I think anyone can save the chat, and look at it in more depth later, in terms of what people have to share. But obviously that's my 2 cents, as it were. I don't know if maybe we'd have 2 cents from somebody else, and if anyone would like to share on that or anything else, and then maybe we'll go into the final meditation.
Hugh, I believe Bob Stout had his hand up.
Bob, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and I don't know if I have 2 cents on that one, other than to say that there is something, and particularly though, I mean, there's just something about the words and verses and art in general, almost having its own life that I feel like I can learn from. And, it may be dark things, it may be positive things, and that by doing that, I don't feel that I'm endorsing the person, but it's a complicated issue. But the real thing I wanted to do just briefly, Hugh, is just a huge thanks to you, just a reflection on poetry, because it's really the way that you have used poetry from when I first started having you as a teacher, that really spoke to my heart, deepened my practice, taught me some poems I'd never known and authors I hadn't known, and really stick with me. I do, that's what's led me to host the Poetry Sangha that we do every 4th Saturday, brief pitch. And we're going to be doing something on New Year's Eve with Rich Battaglia, who does Songs of Enlightenment. And joining me in that are people who are far, far more tutored and learned in poetry than I am. I'm an amateur. I like to write it and I love to read it, but it speaks to me deeply. And the one thing I wanted to add, I think you may have referenced this, and Pat, as a member of the Young Society, is very into this too. And I know we have a lot of therapists probably in the Sangha, but the way that I hold it is that finger, that arrow is shot right into the unconscious if you allow it. And art does that, poetry in particular, in words. And so in some senses, I'm not comparing it to the therapeutic process, but it often, and the thing about it is, don't look at the arrow, don't overanalyze the poem. Ultimately, you can do that, but let it sort of hit your heart, let it wash over you, hit your unconscious. And often you can cry, you can smile, you can be moved and derive messages, frankly, that are hard to put into words, ironically enough, by those words. So, and I think in some ways it's more like painting, and we were talking about this in our breakout, than it is like prose. So just my thoughts, and really a huge thanks to you, Hugh.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for that. That really resonates for me as well. And again, I'm an amateur as well. I went in the direction of the social sciences, and rather than literature. But I love to read poetry, and one of the things I did growing up, and maybe others here had the experience, was learning poetry. Being encouraged to learn poetry by heart. And there's something in that expression, learning by heart, that has a kind of double meaning. It's kind of learning because it really lodges it in the heart. Because the poems that I learn by heart really do tend to get lodged in the heart. I connect with them in exactly the way that you're talking about, Bob, and they open my heart each time I go back to them. I don't have to rustle around for my papers or my books, because I can just go back to there. And so that was one of the gifts from an education that was imperfect, but had some good things about it, for me, and hopefully for others as well. But anyway, I'll continue to include the poetry, but this, I did feel that it deserved a a whole session really as a resource, and I hope it was helpful to folks today. Let's have a sit, a short final sit, and so I invite you to find a posture that's comfortable, relaxed. Take your seat. You might consciously invite the attention to drop down out of the thinking mode, down into the body. The body is always here. Our minds are often elsewhere. So if we can just come into awareness of the body, it's a way of coming home, coming home to ourselves. Come back to the breath. It's always available to us. Our breathing helps us calm the body and the mind. We take a few deeper breaths. Breath gives us a place to rest our attention, to come back to when the mind wanders. And holding whatever is present for you right now with acceptance and with kindness, making space for this. Whatever you're experiencing right now, see if you can hold it with kindness and with care. Maybe the suffering of the world, maybe your own individual pain, maybe somebody's done something or said something that has stuck with you that feels painful or hurtful. You can put your hand on your heart. Connect with, care to what you're experiencing, with compassion. Appreciating your effort today in coming here and practicing your intention or intentions in taking this time and creating the space, creating a clearing in your life. And feeling yourself here, held in community, all of us here. In this space of caring and compassion. In this field of loving kindness, you might send a wish out to everyone here. Maybe a wish or an intention directed towards somebody that you know is experiencing some difficulty or pain or suffering. Those whose family members are sick. Or are hurt in some way. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be held in loving kindness, filled with loving kindness. May you live with ease and with kindness. Finishing with this short poem from Mary Oliver. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift.